A Plague Tale on the surface can be seen as a story about what someone will do to protect the person they love, and because of this, it often gets compared unfavorably to The Last of Us. Both games feature a pair of characters, one older and one younger, attempting to navigate the cruel, uncaring, and oftentimes violent world that is born from a large-scale plague. In The Last of Us, it was the cordyceps virus, and in A Plague Tale, it's the bubonic plague, with the game taking place during the historic Black Death. Both games utilize the setting to create narratives that explore the more calculated violence of the remaining uninfected population, as well as the rampaging horrors of those infected, or in A Plague Tale's case, the source of the infection with the rats. In both games, the younger, more vulnerable member of the pair is infected with something that is tied directly into the plague, and because of this, in both games you play as the other, older, more resourceful character who serves as the protector. These similarities have naturally led many to assume A Plague Tale is a lesser clone or imitation of The Last of Us, which is one of the greatest series ever made. It makes me especially happy then to report that despite these similarities, A Plague Tale is not just a cheap copy. It takes inspiration, but the story that is told across its two games, Innocence and Requiem, is its own. Emotional, beautiful, and often horrific. If you are someone who considers The Last of Us to be one of the greatest games ever made and you haven't yet played A Plague Tale, then I highly recommend you stop watching this video and do so. I feel confident saying that this series will likely be something you enjoy and that you'll get more out of the experience if you go through it unaware of the direction the story is heading. While I would say the idea of protecting the person you love is present, the message of A Plague Tale isn't quite as simple. At the center of the story is a boy named Hugo who is forced into becoming a monster. It's this transition, this pushing from innocent child to one that is emotionally unstable to the eventual empty husk at the end that is by far the thing I'll remember most about this game. It's haunting and tragic and is incredibly well done. The character development that occurs for the two main characters, Hugo and his sister Amicia, is some of the strongest and most engaging character tragedy I've experienced in the video game medium. Which is great because the actual plot that occurs over the course of these two games is not very good. This is a character-driven story rather than a plot-driven one. The events that transpire over the course of these two games, Innocence and Requiem, often don't make sense and are simply there to serve the characters, to explore the relationship and feelings of Hugo and Amicia, and to a lesser extent their collected band of mostly lovable misfits. The plot, while interesting, has many problems. They are never so glaring that they ruin the main focus of A Plague Tale, but they do detract in many moments. It's hard to authentically buy into some of the scenes or the emotions that are being conveyed, particularly when the characters are in danger, when the situations themselves don't make sense. Here's a quick example. In the beginning of the first game, the family estate is attacked, which we'll get into the specifics of in a bit, but as part of the escape, the character's mother, Beatrice, sacrifices herself in order to allow the kids time to escape. After being pushed through a door and having it closed behind them, Amicia and the player witness a bloody sword pierce through the door.
Hurry now! Follow the river! It will lead you to Laurentius! Mother, no!
Due to the timing and positioning, this has to be Beatrice. Her death is significant and serves as the catalyst to not only bring Amicia and Hugo closer together as the last surviving members of their family, but also later as a breaking apart moment when Amicia learns that her mother survived but keeps that information from Hugo. Their mother Beatrice still being alive could be interesting if well written, as it creates the question of how she survived. Unfortunately, it isn't. During one of the later missions, you return to the now rat-infested family estate and see that it was her servant that got stabbed.
He must have taken the hit instead of her.
The first time I played this sequence, I actually rewatched my footage of the original scene afterwards, thinking I had missed something because it didn't seem possible that it could have been the servant. Surely we would have heard some argument, yelling, screaming, or groaning. Those would all be completely realistic and expected things to have occurred if he had gotten stabbed, or from the surrounding people, such as Beatrice or the Inquisition themselves. Yet we hear nothing. The game has to intentionally omit these things, otherwise the characters would have known from the beginning that their mother was still alive. The sequence where you return to the manor actually could have been a much more interesting way to reveal that Beatrice was still alive to begin with. Perhaps Amicia could have wanted to find her mother's body to give her a proper goodbye, but then finds this servant's body still pinned to the door. It would create questions about what really happened. But no, we learn that she is still alive from one of the side characters prior to this because Hugo needs to secretly overhear that his mother is still alive too. Whether Beatrice is dead or alive doesn't actually matter because these events simply serve as ladder rungs for Amicia and Hugo to climb rather than meaningful events themselves, and this unfortunately holds true for the sequel as well. Let's go through an example from the sequel just to show how this type of narrative problem persists through the series. The second game, Requiem, begins with the characters of Amicia and Hugo exploring the area outside of what they assume is an uninhabited castle before deciding to venture within. Once inside, they quickly find themselves stuck after a floor gives out beneath them. We learn that the castle isn't abandoned, but at this point this still seems reasonable. Amicia and her brother's group are just passing through this area and likely wouldn't know if people had taken refuge within the castle. But then the pair step into the interior yards and see that large swaths have been recently burned. This is shown to be a massive burn. Ash and smoke fill the air. The characters themselves observe that it happened recently, and players can even see patches of glowing embers still on some of the wood that support this. Yet as we previously approached the castle, there's no smoke plumes to be seen. This leads to an encounter with the individuals that reside in the castle, a group of beekeepers. Apparently, this group has experienced other individuals attempting to steal from them and are unbelievably pissed about it, so much so that they're willing to kill anyone and everyone who is found trespassing. Players overhear that there was also a recent raid by the thieves, so recent that at least one member of that group is still in the castle.
Leave it to me!
I beg you! No! Please!
Should have thought of that before you lot stole from us!
The grandfather to this beekeeping family is said to have been hurt, and the scene is literally described as a bloodbath. So now not only was there a large-scale fire that wasn't seen, but there was also at least some level of serious fighting that occurred but wasn't heard. The point being that it seems likely the characters or player would have noticed these beforehand, so the game deliberately omits information that should be present. However, the game can't telegraph that there's danger or give the real context because then the characters wouldn't put themselves in these situations. But of course they need to, however, because that's how Hugo and Amicia get to their next rung on the character development ladder, by being in danger. Again, the narrative is character-driven versus plot-driven. The ending for this sequence with the beekeepers sees Hugo forced to use his ability to summon rats for the first time in 6 months in order to save Amicia from several of the beekeepers. These events, in theory, need to happen because they mark the first time since the events at the end of the first game that Hugo has used his powers, and it serves as the domino that sets in motion everything for the sequel. Both games are filled with moments like these. Where on your first playthrough you likely won't recognize the inconsistencies or omissions because you're being rapidly shuttled along through set pieces, which are usually fantastic, I might add, but by the time you have a chance to breathe, you've forgotten many of the finer details. This demonstrates to me that the plot is supposed to be secondary to the moments between Hugo and Amicia. Does this make A Plague Tale bad games? Absolutely not, but it does make them worse than they could have been. The largest problem with the narrative experience of A Plague Tale: Innocence and its sequel Requiem is consistency. This manifests as a problem in two ways. First, through long-term inconsistencies between the games in regards to information or lore that is presented one way but then shifted for the sequel. I understand that visions and long-term ideas can and often do change during development, but many aren't even attempted to be stitched together, and the issues start multiplying faster than the rats. This is then compounded by the second way, through short-term inconsistencies within each game in regards to the characters. Many people in both games are competent until they aren't, acting stupid when required by the narrative. This is our characters, companions, NPCs, villains, everyone. Many situations the characters are thrown into only occur because someone does something unnecessary, out of character, irrational, or a combination of these. A strong narrative relies on internal consistency, which unfortunately A Plague Tale often doesn't have, and it's this issue alone, as far as I'm concerned, that holds it back from potentially being one of the best stories in gaming. That's a pretty tall order, but it's genuinely how I feel when I think back on the story that Amicia and Hugo go through. I want to first go through that story, the story of both Plague Tale games, so that its issues with consistency can be properly understood afterwards. I understand this might be a bit tedious for those that have played the game, but I tried to keep this section short, with only the necessary aspects of the plot getting summarized. Many people who watch these sorts of videos don't actually play the games themselves, or if they do, they find these videos much later, and so having an understanding or refresher of what occurs helps with understanding the basis of much of the criticism. And that was your second spoiler warning.
We need to leave. Now. Yes. Sorry, we still have quite the road ahead of us.
The Plague Tale series is set in southern France during the 14th century and is centered on a small noble family known as the de Runes, the children Amicia and Hugo specifically, as their father dies in the opening 15 minutes of the game and their mother Beatrice has about the same level of usefulness despite being in both games. One of the best aspects of A Plague Tale, particularly the first game, Innocence, is seeing the evolution of Amicia and Hugo's sibling relationship. As the beginning of the game, they are effectively strangers.
It's me. Your sister? Amicia?
Hello.
We haven't seen each other much. Mummy will be back soon.
See, Hugo is sick. Really sick. He is a 5-year-old boy that has been kept largely in isolation because of this sickness, even from his own flesh and blood sister. Attempting to cure his condition has become an all-consuming task for their alchemist mother Beatrice, so much so that she is borderline neglectful of her daughter.
Mother?
You know you're not supposed to be here.
I know, but something attacked Leon in the forest.
My dear, I really wish I had the time to listen to your adventures, but
It's not clear in the beginning exactly what is wrong with Hugo, and even once it's revealed, you still won't have a full picture of just how serious his illness is or what it will cost him and those around him. Hugo is a carrier for something known as the Prima Macula, or just Macula for short, which is a fictional blood curse that infects certain bloodlines, the de Runes being one of them.
There's an old story. It tells of the Prima Macula. The alchemists say it was the first corruption, and that it silently travels in the blood of certain families. But something happened. The Great Break. and the macula awoke. In Hugo's blood.
But what will it do to him?
The macula cares for neither good nor evil. It evolves with its host. The changelings.
It's this disease that draws the ruthless religious inquisition to the family's doorstep in the opening chapter of the first game. Present among the Inquisition is a heavily armored soldier named Nicholas, who kills Amicia's father after he refuses to give the location of Hugo. Beatrice helps her children escape the estate, but sacrifices herself to the Inquisition in order to give her children more time. This is the death fake-out scene I described earlier. From here, the game transitions to finding a fellow alchemist named Laurentius, who has also been researching the Prima Macula. The siblings enter a nearby village in order to get directions, but are unwelcome and hunted by the villagers through the town, which leads to Amicia having to kill someone for the first time. The siblings are eventually able to find safety from the villagers, but are introduced to a new problem, the plague rats. Again, to be clear, I have quite a lot to say actually about several of the scenes I just described, but I want to get through the basic plot summary before getting into them. The beginning chapters are about locating this other alchemist, Laurentius. However, when you finally do, you learn that he is sick with the plague himself. Laurentius passes away, but his apprentice Lucas joins the de Rune siblings to search for the Alchemist Order's secret castle, the Chateau d'Ambrogis, where they can establish a home base away from the Inquisition. In the process, they travel across the horrific remains of a battlefield, get captured by English soldiers, further evade the Inquisition, and finally meet a pair of orphan thieves, Melly and Arthur. Once at the Alchemist Castle, the middle chapters shift the focus to helping Lucas finish the elixir for Hugo by first finding him a forbidden alchemy book within the city, and then escorting him back to the de Rune estate so he can utilize Beatrice's advanced alchemy lab in crafting it. During these middle chapters, we also get introduced to the Grand Inquisitor Vitalis Benevon, who is the reason the Inquisition is so specifically fixated on Hugo, the de Runes, and the Macula.
I am the Grand Inquisitor Vitalis Benevon. You have no idea how I have suffered. Look what I endure for you.
Vitalis has spent years studying the macula prior to the events of the game, but was forced into action to acquire the carrier after he himself was bitten by the plague rats and contracted the bubonic plague. He has been able to slow the progression of the plague with standard blood transfusions, mind you using technology that didn't actually exist for the time period, but he needs the blood of a carrier to stop the disease given the macula's connection to the plague. In the final chapters of the game, Amicia learns that their mother Beatrice is alive and being held captive by the Inquisition. She chooses not to share this information with Hugo and instead lie to him about her, not knowing that he has already overheard that their mother was alive. This prompts Hugo to run away in order to find the Inquisition and be with his mother, only to be upset when, surprise, the Inquisition just uses him for their own means. Prior to running away, he is also given the finished elixir, rendering the macula once again dormant. However, this is almost immediately undone a few chapters later as he is forced into crossing an irreversible threshold with the disease. Directed by his mother, Hugo begins the process of passing the first threshold in order to help their escape attempt from the Inquisition dungeons. Their escape is ultimately unsuccessful, but beginning the process allows Hugo to weakly control the plague rats. Unfortunately, this is exactly what Vitalis planned, as due to having undergone a blood transfusion with the boy, Vitalis now has the macula within his own system and gains the same abilities Hugo does as the disease progresses. In order to fully pass this threshold, Hugo is manipulated into thinking he must kill Amicia and is taken to do so by Nicholas. Hugo does indeed pass the first threshold, but only after the siblings reconcile and then defeat an angry Nicholas. Afterwards, Amicia, Hugo, and the band of orphans they've been collecting journey back to the city in order to stop Vitalis.
Even if it kills us, what have we got to lose?
Us? Nothing. But Vitalis. Now we can stop him.
So let's go. To the death. To the death.
This leads to a final chapter back in the city, which has now been corrupted by the plague rats. Roderick is killed, to which you might be thinking, who? And that's exactly the point. It all ends in a cathedral with a final boss fight against Vitalis, who has bred his own unique plague rats that only respond to his unique Macula signature. He is killed, Beatrice is rescued, and the epilogue suggests that the rats appear to be gone for good, or so the people believe, which is good, but it is also bittersweet, as word has begun to spread of a girl and boy who are wanted by important people. Amicia, Hugo, Beatrice, and Lucas continue their search for a cure for Hugo, with the horizon showing an ocean and suggesting that perhaps that search will continue in another country. This ending is fine, most of the plot amounted to nothing, and the only real substance that is carried forward into the sequel is the relationship between the siblings. Requiem picks up 6 months later on the road to the Red City. The party seeks the help of the alchemist order that Beatrice is a part of and are meeting a member named Vaudin within the city. Hugo passed the second threshold for the Prima Macula at some point between the two games, and there has been relative calm for the group since. Unfortunately, that changes here with the scene I spoke about earlier with Amicia and Hugo stumbling onto the group of beekeepers in the castle. Hugo calls the rats to save Amicia from the attackers, and the stress from the whole encounter causes the macula to reawaken. The first several chapters in the game are all centered on or around the Red City. First, you must find the Order member Magister Vaudin, then it becomes finding an herbalist just outside of the town for a specific plant for Hugo, and finally you go to the harbor to find their hired ship captain in order to leave. These chapters reveal that the Red City is actually hanging by a thread. The sick and dying have been quarantined and left to die in the slums, whole districts are beginning to be locked down, and strict curfews are enacted in order to secretly conduct mass burning of all the bodies. The Magister Vaudin is not only unable to help Hugo, but actually makes matters worse with his testing, causing Hugo to have a series of seizures which trigger literal tidal waves of rats to destroy the city. Vaudin is killed, but the rest of the group is able to safely get to their ship. The plan from there is to continue the journey to the Order's headquarters in Marseille due to the reveal that Hugo will soon pass the third threshold and subsequently die. Marseille does not offer hope or a potential cure, but rather just a place to contain him until his death, which understandably both Hugo and Amicia aren't stoked about. Hugo offers an alternative, finding an island that he's been having reoccurring dreams about wherein he is cured of the macula. Despite this, Beatrice remains fixated on Marseille, and so the siblings use an opportunity while traveling down the river to separate from their mother and Lucas, and instead attempt to find Hugo's island. They get help from two characters, the first of which is Arnaud, a knight/mercenary formerly in the service of the Count of Provence, and then second, Sophia, who's a smuggler and ship captain, and with both they are able to locate the mystical island of Cuna soon after.
Look! There's something there! That's it! Cuna!
The focus while on the island is Amicia and Hugo learning about the previous carrier, a boy named Basilius, as well as his protector, a woman named Aelia. They see reflections of themselves in the relics left behind by the pair and are disturbed to learn that a cure for the macula was never found. The Order instead locked Basilius away deep underground until his death, and Aelia was brutally killed when she tried to stop them. Feeling betrayed and alone, Basilius's death actually triggered the first recorded plague in history, the Justinian Plague. As Amicia and Hugo learn more about the pair, Hugo becomes increasingly disheartened and angry, much to Amicia's dismay. Beatrice and Lucas find their way to the island as well and are quickly looped into the situation. They come to the decision that for Hugo to have the best chances at survival and not accelerating the macula, they should return to the mainland and live a quiet life in the mountains. Of course, this doesn't actually happen. The local rulers, Count Victor Arlies and his wife Emily, have it in their heads that Hugo is a local folktale reborn, and so in an attempt to keep and raise him as their own, they try to kill off his family. Only the attempts against Beatrice are successful, however, it is witnessed by Amicia and more importantly Hugo, who effectively snaps, calling forth hordes of rats from beneath the island. Emily is devoured, but the Count survives and vows revenge before escaping. Despite now being free, the costs are still great. Hugo is left broken following the encounter, consumed by the macula.
Please, Hugo. Say something. Look at me, please. I need you.
And on the way to the docks, the kids discover an enormous rat nest lurking under the surface. The rats, through the macula, have begun producing an ash-like substance that can extinguish fires and block out the sun, thus allowing further spreading of the rats and the plague. Amicia, Lucas, and Hugo are able to reach the docks and escape with Arnaud and Sophia out to sea, but the victory is short-lived as the Count's forces trail and eventually overtake their vessel. Amicia is shot with an arrow, Hugo is taken, and their ship is destroyed. In the wreckage, Arnaud battles the Count and is mortally wounded, but is able to temporarily remove the villain's helmet, which gives Amicia a clear shot with her sling to kill him. In the final chapter, the remaining members, Amicia, Lucas, and Sophia, rush to Marseille where Hugo has been taken, but discover that Hugo has fully given himself over to the macula. As part of that process, Hugo has begun releasing large amounts of the ash material, allowing the plague rats to spread easily despite it being daytime. Through a series of dreamlike visions of her brother as she moves towards the heart of the city, Amicia is guided towards accepting that she must kill Hugo in order to stop the macula and the plague. In the final moments, either Amicia or Lucas, if the players wait too long, will end Hugo's life. In the epilogue that follows, a year has passed and Amicia, along with the ship captain Sophia, get ready to set out on a journey to gather information about future carriers in order to attempt to help them. Lucas, meanwhile, continues his alchemist training on the road by himself. In one final after-credits scene, we are shown a brief moment in a hospital sometime in the future. A baby is on a ventilator, and as the camera pans across its arm, we see the black veins of the macula along with its accompanying theme, indicating that the disease persists into more modern times. And that's it, at least for now. At the time of making this video, there have been no official announcements of a third game in the series, but I would be surprised if we don't get more. Having now gone through the narrative of both games, let's get into the consistency problems that the Plague Tale series has. In the first game, it's unclear how the macula, the rats, and the plague are all connected. The sequel provides some answers to this while also making it less clear what exactly the affliction is. We're shown that the rats and thus the plague are drawn forth by the presence of someone carrying the disease, a carrier like Hugo. The sequel demonstrates this by showing that to some extent the rats follow a carrier wherever they go, and so they must be able to sense the macula within the afflicted individual. This leads to a spreading of the plague to any areas the carrier visits, which leads to further death, which creates fuel for the rats to build their nests and further breed. This creates a cycle. This all implies that the macula is simply an illness, a small-scale stand-in representation of what the world is dealing with. A way for the characters to have skin in the game and to explore what happens in this sort of environment without having to deal with the logistics of a party member themselves having a contagious bacteria like the bubonic plague. Well, it's actually more complicated than this because eventually Hugo can control the rats through the macula, and in Requiem we're shown that it can't simply be a disease, but has to instead be some sort of entity, or at the very least capable of some level of consciousness and perhaps has a will itself. It's able to influence the dreams Hugo has, and it does so in order to manipulate him, planting the seeds that the island of Cuna holds a cure for him. It's also able to direct the rat infestation itself ahead of where the carrier is. It does this in the earlier chapters of the second game, where Amicia and Lucas are dismayed to find the Red City with so many already dead from the plague, despite their personal arrival just hours earlier, and despite 6 months earlier it seeming like the rats were gone.
There's so many dead already. Like it's one step ahead of us.
We're shown that the macula has an end goal of sorts. It creates and wants to spread that substance referred to as a nebula, that gray ash material that blocks out sunlight that I spoke about in the recap. This substance allows the rats to move unrestricted even in the daylight, which is what we see in Marseille. And finally, late in the sequel, we see the macula itself influencing and talking through Hugo directly several times, and in direct response to stimuli around it, meaning it can process observations. All of this clearly indicates that it has some level of intelligence, especially when compared against many of the human characters we'll see, and while there might be some that don't like this level of fundamental change between the games, it's a welcome change for me personally. The macula essentially becomes a villain and even gets its own villainous sound effect, this high-pitched screech on the violin that the game uses quite well throughout.
This is madness. You never said what. Oh, by the way, my brother controls rats and gets them to eat people. You'd have run away.
It adds a touch of almost cosmic or occultish horror to the series, which is always something I enjoy. It's not all roses, however, as this change to the macula does also play a large role in creating problems, these inconsistencies, especially as they relate to the series' other big focus, which is alchemy.
Wow! The great work!
It wasn't supposed to do that.
It doesn't matter, Lucas. Perhaps we should let you rest, right, Hugo?
Well done, Lucas. You're a sorcerer.
Both games are centered on alchemy, but in particular, it's the driving force behind much of the first game. The kids' mother, Beatrice, is a member of an ancient order of alchemists and is renowned for her abilities. She works tirelessly to find the cure for Hugo. Alchemy is unyieldingly seen as the only potential cure for Hugo. When the armed Inquisition forces show up at the de Rune estate demanding her son in the first chapter, Beatrice's final words to her children before her assumed but not really death aren't a heartfelt goodbye, but rather orders to find the alchemist colleague of hers, Laurentius. Lucas's attempts to finish that cure require a forbidden alchemical book. Your return to the de Rune estate is for alchemical ingredients. Alchemy is a cornerstone of even the gameplay as you acquire various recipes that allow you to craft different types of ammo for your sling, ranging from ones that can light certain materials on fire to others that can temporarily attract the swarm of rats. I'm drawing so much attention to alchemy here because I want to highlight how you're meant to view it in this series. It's baked into the identity, but it also creates many inconsistencies. Beatrice has her own state-of-the-art and secret alchemical lab on the grounds of the family estate, built in the remains of an old Roman bathhouse. This lab in particular is special and was built by the Order with a purpose, presumably given that it features a fresco mural of the previous Great Plague, the Justinian plague that occurred in the 6th century and which was also caused by the Macula. The problem is that it looks far too old for it to have been built specifically for her, but then on the other hand, Beatrice married into the de Rune family, so why would it have been there prior to her? This could have actually been an interesting background point, that perhaps Beatrice and the Alchemist Order targeted the de Rune family due to written transcripts about the cursed bloodline. It was something even the Church and Inquisition were doing during that time period, and it would make the Order appear much more competent and calculating because otherwise it's all just a coincidence and or an inconsistency. Beatrice just so happens to have a son who has the blood curse, and just so happens to be an alchemist herself, and just so happens to have married into a family that has an alchemical lab on its estate with a historic painting of a previous outcome of that blood curse? It's possible she became so renowned in alchemy and a member of the Order after the birth of her son and learning of his condition, but again, this seems unlikely given how the Order treats even Lucas in the sequel, despite him showing himself to be an extremely competent apprentice. He literally finishes the alchemical elixir that both his previous master as well as Beatrice struggled with, yet is treated with contempt.
And you are?
I'm Lucas. I'm an alchemist too.
An apprentice. Does your magistrate know you entitle yourself?
The very worst example of the series' inconsistencies is with the island presented in the sequel, Cuna, which has almost as many inconsistencies as the island in Lost. Now, despite playing quite a large role in the sequel, there's a lot of problems created by the island's existence and what occurs there. In the first chapter, Hugo passes out at the conclusion of the incident with the beekeepers that I spoke about earlier, and we briefly get to control him in a dream sequence where he moves across an island following a phoenix. Upon awaking, we learn that this is a reoccurring dream that Hugo has been having.
I was dreaming. Where are we?
Was it your island dream again?
Yes. I was sick, and then there was a big bird that saved me.
Then when Amicia and Lucas find the Order alchemist Vaudin in the Red City, he has a fresco in his office of that very same mountain, the one with the twin peaks. When Amicia brings up the island the following chapter as a potential solution for Hugo's illness, it is dismissed as a fairy tale.
Wait! There's an island! He keeps talking about an island! Maybe the macula is behind it!
It is a child fantasy.
So what's a child's fantasy doing on the wall of your laboratory?
Yes, what's out there?
Poor girl. You're running away from reality. You must accept your brother's fate and your own.
Even by their mother as well.
His island, Mother!
Not now, Amicia.
Fine!
The island obviously exists, and the sequel's second half largely takes place there, as we've spoken about. You learn that it previously served not just as a containment facility for the previous Macula carrier, but also his tomb. When the Alchemist Order couldn't find a cure for the carrier, their solution was to instead lock him away from anyone else, to let him die alone.
They were always afraid.
They left a child to die.
He unleashed the rats. They tore through their walls. They couldn't stop them. It started here.
What?
The Justinian plague.
He was sad. So sad and angry.
The outcome of that decision, as I've mentioned, was the Justinian plague. Let's stop and rewind back to Hugo waking up after his dream sequence, where he informs them that once again he's had the same dream about the bird and the island. This should be it. Done. Beatrice, as the renowned alchemist she is, with the knowledge of the macula she has, should immediately recognize parts of Hugo's dream. The phoenix as one of the symbols that the Order uses, and the twin-peaked island from the research she surely did while attempting to create a cure. Someone within the Order would have logged all of the information they had about the macula and what they've attempted for a cure. Even if Hugo's descriptions are vague enough that Beatrice and Vaudin don't make the connection, this is still a reoccurring dream, and given what they've seen Hugo do up to this point, as well as the nature of the macula, I would consider anything and everything that happens to him important, especially reoccurring dreams.
Mother wants you to...
No! The island! It's where I must go! It's where I will be fixed, Amicia! We can find it, please! Nobody listens! I told Mother I felt unwell, but the Majesty shushed me. He said it was part of the test. Mother and the Majesty, they think they know, but they don't. And people die because of me!
Hey. I know. I will do what's good for you. I will.
In the sequel, everyone still treats Hugo and Amicia like their children, which they are, but they've also had to climb over dead bodies, watch their friends die, and also kill people. One of the best minor plot threads in the sequel, in fact, is when it looks at Amicia's corroding mental health. So what about this island then? Why are Vaudin and Beatrice keeping it secret? The options are either because they genuinely don't know about it, and by extension the previous carrier, or that they do but they don't want the children to go there. The first option would be ridiculous, given that Vaudin's office has a painted mural of the island and that Beatrice's personal research laboratory has a mural painted of the Justinian plague, which was started by the previous carrier. It also would go against everything the game has presented about the Order.
The Order knows the macula. Hugo is not alone. I'm here.
So that just leaves the second option, that Vaudin and Beatrice know about the island and the Order's history on it and are simply gaslighting the kids into believing that it doesn't exist. This is actually what is happening and is quite interesting. Vaudin is hiding this information from Hugo and Amicia specifically because of what happened with the previous carrier, Basilius. He understands that the macula is manipulating Hugo through his dreams in order to lure him to the island so he can continue what was started by Basilius's death, the creation and release of that substance I mentioned earlier known as the nebula. Doing so will block the sun with ash, allowing the plague rats to be active during the day. The nebula has grown under the island of Cuna for almost 1,000 years and can only be activated by a new carrier, hence the macula presenting the island as a cure for Hugo in his dreams. Again, this all makes sense and is also backed by the fact that it would be ridiculous if Vaudin and Beatrice didn't know about the island of Cuna given what occurred there previously. It would simply make no sense.
The Order knows the macula.
Vaudin is not sharing this information with the kids, which in turn makes Amicia suspicious of him and his methods of helping Hugo.
Mother, you must stop this. We don't know this man.
Amicia, this sort of thing was always likely. And this man is an exalted member of the most ancient college of alchemists that exists.
After the Red City is overran with rats, the group begins traveling to Marseille in order to seek further help from the Order. However, Hugo and Amicia stubbornly refuse to listen and split off themselves to find the island. This is reckless but also understandable given that neither Vaudin or Beatrice are being honest with them about their knowledge of the island as well as the macula, and so they don't have the full picture. Unfortunately, Amicia and Hugo going to the island causes part of the nebula to be released on the island, causing chaos. Beatrice eventually arrives there with Lucas, as we've talked about, and she chastises Amicia and Hugo, but also comes clean to them about what the group of alchemists actually know about the island. The de Rune siblings are distraught to learn that the Macula has been manipulating them, pushing them towards the island in order to further its own goals like some invisible puppet master. So this all ends up making sense then, why the Order was intentionally keeping the island shrouded in so much mystery. It's reasonable, makes sense, fits with the lore, and is also a cool reveal once Beatrice finally explains it to Amicia and Hugo. Additionally, it gives the Macula some sort of motivation and explains why it was pushing so hard for the siblings to go to the island. This is good then, right? Well, not exactly, because most of what I just went through with this second option, where Vaudin and Beatrice are gaslighting, I actually just made up. It is based around events that occur, such as Amicia and Hugo splitting off and there being a nebula under the island, but as far as the game presents, the nebula was neither created by the previous carrier or is the reason the Macula wants Hugo to come to the island in the first place. Wouldn't that have made sense if it was, though? There is no reveal that Vaudin and Beatrice actually knew about the island and what transpired on it. In fact, we get the opposite when the de Rune siblings are finally reunited with their mother.
But tell me, is it the one? This island?
The one from your dream.
There was another carrier, like me.
Another carrier?
Yes. Back in the 6th century. A child called Basilius. We found him, chained, in an Order prison designed especially for him.
What?
I think they panicked when he reached his last threshold. They took him away from his protector.
Vaudin himself doesn't even have the chance to become an interesting character or villain because he just dies unceremoniously in the Red City during the rat attack early in the game. So this all means then that the answer to that question I posed earlier of why are Vaudin and Beatrice keeping the island a secret is actually the first of those two options because they don't know of its existence. I understand that some people might find the example I just made up frustrating, but that's at least in part the point. It wasn't that difficult for an amateur YouTuber like myself to come up with some explanation that both made sense and that changed almost nothing about the actual structure or content of the game as it currently is. So if I can do it, why couldn't the experts over at Asobo Studio? Second, and more importantly, however, is that the truth that they are unaware of the island realistically doesn't make sense, and worse, it creates even more inconsistencies with the Macula and the Alchemist Order. The Order is supposed to be this prestigious proto-scientific order, yet no one apparently thought to chronicle the previous attempts with this disease and carriers?
The Order knows the Macula.
Well, this also turns out to not be true because the Order did take notes on the previous carrier, extensive notes that you can find in the secret laboratory and compound where Basilius was housed on Cuna.
Your alchemists wrote down everything that happened to the carrier. It's sorted by date. The last entry was in the year 541.
541?
I think it's more than fair to assume then that this would likely be some sort of required reading for all members of the Order, never mind the Macula specialists, Beatrice and Vaudin.
He's your son, do something! Ah, the Protector, finally!
You won't calm down, I don't know what to do.
And I can already see the responses I'm going to get, that it's likely no one survived the island to be able to speak of the events, and so they were forgotten about. That's clearly what the game is trying to say happened, that no one survived, and thus the locals that eventually resettled the island found parts of this facility and used it to create their own local religion based around their interpretations of the frescoes. This is the Child of Ember's folk story that the Count and his wife believe in. We'll circle back to this religion a bit later in the video, but for now let's stay focused on the Order and the fact that they apparently forgot about Cuna's existence. Think about what that means for a second. The last encounter with this illness, the macula, the alchemists were forced to imprison and abandon the last carrier when they couldn't find a cure. That's how desperate they were. This ultimately failed as it brought about the Justinian plague. If you were an alchemist during that encounter or the plague that followed, you would no doubt want future researchers to have a correct timeline and log of what had happened, but as it's presented in the game, it's saying that at no point in almost 1,000 years since the previous carrier's death did any members of the Order go back to the island to determine what occurred and/or to collect the documents. And listen, I'm not a historian or even close to expert on this time period, so maybe this is actually completely reasonable how it's presented and I'm in the wrong. If someone watching this video has the expertise and evidence to explain why the way it's currently presented actually is realistic, please do so in a comment. I just find it hard to believe. The Order claims to know so much, yet the few members we meet and the organization as a whole appears so incompetent. They can't even be bothered to have their local alchemist Vaudin waiting for our characters once they arrive in the Red City. The Order literally knows about the macula, how the Inquisition attacked the de Rune family, and the unintentional destruction that Hugo has caused in the first game, yet Vaudin is just chilling in his office. This is something I originally thought was intentional, that the sequel was showing the hubris of those who practiced alchemy. That Vaudin would be present for more of the game to serve as a foil to Amicia and perhaps a corrupting influence over Beatrice and Lucas, both alchemists themselves. This doesn't happen, and as I've mentioned, Vaudin is quickly killed off after just enough screen time to be able to consider him an asshole. Let's return to the Island Inconsistencies list. The sequel introduces the concept of a protector, an individual whose sole job it is to protect the current macula carrier. Vaudin designates Amicia as such when they first meet.
Well, I didn't have a choice.
Not a choice. A calling. That of a carrier's protector.
A what?
A protector. Your function among the Order.
But how do him and Beatrice even know what a protector is if they don't know about Basilius, the original carrier to begin with? If you're someone who believes it's reasonable to say that the alchemist pair don't know anything about the island, then I think that should mean they also know nothing about protectors, since that would have had to come from the island. It cuts both ways. You might be thinking that perhaps there's been other carriers, but I don't personally think that that is reasonable either. The Justinian plague is the first recorded plague in history, and while there could have been some unrecorded before, they would have been exactly that, unrecorded, meaning no records of. The actual idea of the carrier having a protector is one that I ended up liking, but not as much as I thought I was going to. See, once the concept got introduced, I spent the rest of the game waiting for the reveal that Amicia herself was being manipulated and even potentially enhanced by the macula. That the protector was something the disease used in order to protect itself, given that the two in-game examples we see of carriers and the one in the post-credit scene are all children. Amicia is so rage-filled and pushy at points in the game that I was convinced that the macula was influencing her itself, perhaps releasing pheromones or something through Hugo in order to psychologically affect her and create a symbiotic relationship. I'm not saying that this is a good idea, but it was something that made sense in my head, given the protectors would always be near the carrier, and with both Amicia and Aelia, we see how almost unhuman they are in combat, as well as their ability to withstand serious injuries. This brings us to my final thought about the island. Why did the macula want Hugo to even go there? Hugo gets psychological trauma from much of what he witnesses at Cuna, which in theory creates deeper footholds for the macula, but this isn't a good enough reason all on its own. Both the first game and sections of the sequel prior to the island present deeply disturbing events for Hugo to experience, and so visiting the island purely for corroding his mental health doesn't make sense. Originally, I thought it had something to do with the large-scale nebula that we see under the island. Maybe it was something Basilius created with his death, and the macula needed Hugo to activate by being physically present. This can't be the case, however, as Hugo and by extension the macula create a new nebula in Marseille during the last chapter once the final threshold of the disease is passed. The only other thing that I can come up with is that the macula wanted the siblings to see what was done to Basilius and Aelia in order to turn them against the Order, which would mean a higher chance of survival itself. As the pair explore the depths of what happened with the previous carrier, we see on multiple occasions Hugo begin to express anger specifically towards the Order.
But no!
That explains why it stands above the child on their frescoes.
They thought they were better than him. They didn't care about him.
While I'm not entirely convinced this is the answer, it's the best I can come up with given that the developers likely don't want there to be clean answers around the macula. It's kind of like how the macula can't outright be the source of the plague in these two games because the Black Death is already ravaging France before Amicia and Hugo even start their journey in the first game, yet the sequel clearly implies that the Justinian plague was caused by Basilius giving into the disease. This is sorta a Plague Tales version of the classic chicken and the egg scenario. Does the macula cause the plague, or does the plague cause enough stress that it awakens the macula? The game presents enough evidence that it could go either way. If you're going to play these games, you just have to be like Amicia and accept that you might not be happy where the road takes you. Now, there's a chapter very early in the first game where, having just escaped their estate and the Inquisition temporarily, Amicia and Hugo enter a nearby village looking for help, only to find the streets empty. They eventually arrive at the town square and witness a horrific scene of the villagers burning several others who are presumed to be infected. This somehow, through no fault of their own, doesn't end well for Amicia and Hugo.
No, wait, we're just looking for someone.
And you found him. It's your damn music what brought them out, huh? Those dirty vermin that invaded our church. That filth would attack our children in their beds and gave them the black thing. But now you found Conrad Malfort.
You are chased through the village by psychotic villagers like you've suddenly been transported into Resident Evil 4, despite literally just needing someone to give you directions. Let's pause for a moment because this illustrates what the Plague Tales series' other inconsistency problem is, that both games often rely on characters acting stupid or out of character in order to move the plot forward. In the village, the man leading the charge against the siblings is named Conrad and has apparently become unhinged after losing his child to the plague rats, and who has rallied many of the other villagers to carry a suspicion of outsiders as well. This is apparently why these people's initial reaction to seeing two lost children is to terrorize and hunt them. This is just ridiculously stupid, even in a time of plague and rat swarms, and even if Conrad has recently lost his child, it's cartoonish for a series that takes itself as seriously as A Plague Tale does, and it often creates a disconnect between the game's experience and the feelings that it seems to want me to have. Let's go through two more examples to properly demonstrate why this is a problem. The first occurs shortly after this section in the village, and then the second is from the sequel. So after escaping the villagers, Amicia and Hugo enter the nearby monastery and meet a monk by the name of Father Thomas, who supposedly knows where to find Laurentius. They find him literally burying some of his dead brothers who have been eaten by the rats. We don't know this yet because the rats haven't been introduced, but that's the situation, and Father Thomas is 100% aware of the rats. As he leads them into the monastery, he makes a point to grab a torch and tells the children to stay in the light.
Above all, be sure to stay in the light.
But then once in the inner chamber, he just hands the torch to Amicia and wanders off by himself, only to get eaten seconds later. Yes, candles magically get blown out, but that only makes the writing here worse. This type of scenario still occurs in the sequel, and we can see an example of it late in the game with a scene involving the character Arnaud, who's a companion character for the siblings and a former knight. Arnaud is mostly a good character, and I'll discuss him and the other companions a bit further in this section. What you need to know now, though, is that he betrays the siblings near the game's halfway mark, and as a consequence winds up getting captured by the sequel's main military force, the Count's army. This was all done mostly well in the story. What's not done well, however, is the rescue operation for him that occurs near the end of the game. Hugo has almost entirely given into the Macula. The nebula beneath the island of Cuna is beginning to spill over, and the island itself is overrun with rats and literally being ripped apart. It's apocalyptic and actually has a fantastic atmosphere as Amicia, Hugo, and Lucas attempt to make their way to what remains of the docks in order to escape. About halfway through this chapter, they hear this, though.
I can't believe our Countess is dead. I heard the Count is so devastated he won't even be there for the hanging. They built a gallows on the harbour square for Arnaud.
They're hanging the walls? Damn them, I wanted to see that.
Yes, me too.
He's not dead. He needs us.
We don't have time.
We must go.
Really? Even after what he's done?
To be clear, I think it makes sense that the last shred of Hugo's humanity wants to save Arnaud because he has gotten attached to him, but what doesn't make sense is why this hanging is even occurring. Look at this footage, bell towers collapsing, giant chasms, and rubble everywhere. It makes no sense for time to be spent building a gallows to have a formal hanging. The Count and his forces even leave Cuna soon after this, so why not just leave Arnaud to die on the island from the rats? It doesn't really make sense. Moments like these are constantly happening and need to happen because they are what lead to set pieces, gameplay moments, or character development. Father Thomas getting eaten alive not only introduces the rats to Amicia, Hugo, and the player in a grand and horrific fashion, but also leaves us to deal with it by ourselves for the very first time and without an NPC guide. The rat swarms function as puzzles that players must figure out how to navigate through or around based on the current environment, but they create an oppressive atmosphere that is quite memorable with their endless movement. And this goes double for the sequel Requiem, where it often feels like a sea of the creatures. The fluid movements of the rats on screen right now, sloshing around and reacting to the shifting location of the light source as the guard swings the torch, is just so goddamn impressive to me and just visually interesting. Having to deal with the rats for the first time alone makes the moment feel even more intense. With Arnaud and the hanging, he has to be rescued because rightfully so, his character arc of seeking revenge needs to be wrapped up. And rescuing him has to occur the way it does because having an execution to interrupt even during an apocalypse allows for a gameplay segment where you hold back waves of enemies as opposed to what would likely, if done realistically, just be sneaking into an abandoned prison in order to rescue him. Having this execution occur on the docks for whatever reason also allows for the streamlining of it being at the same destination our characters are already traveling to. After holding back the wave of enemies, a cutscene can trigger and the chapter can end with the assumption that the characters made it onto the nearby ship as opposed to having to travel through another section of the destroyed city. And circling back to that very first moment, the one in the village with the brute Conrad, it leads to the siblings being frantically chased through the village in a tense set piece, but more importantly, however, is that it leads to Amicia having to kill someone for the first time.
Leave him alone!
So that's where you were?
No, wait, we just want to leave.
You will leave, yes, and never come back.
Please, no! I didn't want to.
This scene is good, but it's immediately followed by her having to kill someone much more significant, that man Conrad, and the scene is mostly better.
Yes. Take me to my...
Amicia. You killed him.
I'm not sure why these two moments weren't condensed into just one scene that had a greater impact, because they literally occur within 2 minutes of each other and both are weaker because of it. Forcing Amicia, a 15-year-old girl, to kill someone for the first time is significant and should carry with it the same weight we see when Ellie has to do it in The Last of Us or Atreus in God of War 2018. But unfortunately, because of the ridiculousness of the situation and the whole segment feeling rushed, it ends up not being as impactful as it could. It becomes just an okay character moment when it should have been a great one. I actually find it surprising that the developers at Asobo stumbled with this moment when they, on the other hand, crafted one of the most thoughtful blink and you'll miss it character moments that spans both games. About halfway through the first game, Innocence, there's a quiet moment between the siblings where they give up the family necklaces.
Amicia? I'm sorry. I'm sick.
No.
They are being hunted by the Inquisition, who are specifically looking for the Darun children, so having their family crest of a tree hanging around their neck as identification is dangerous, and by this point in the story has already been used against them with the English soldiers. The developers show us the siblings cutting ties with who they were without needing the characters to say, "We're no longer the Daruns." Later in the game, however, Hugo takes his necklace back.
He's gone.
He does so only after learning that his mother Beatrice is still alive, and only after learning that Amicia has lied to him about this. He runs away, and having this necklace allows him to quickly be found by the Inquisition so he can be with his mother. In this case, it's reasonable for both Hugo to be upset that his sister is keeping that information from him, and it's also reasonable that Amicia doesn't share the information about their mother until she's had time to figure out what they can do. Fast forwarding to the epilogue of the sequel, it's been a year since the game's final chapter where the Macula fully consumed Hugo and Amicia was forced to kill him. We hear that she and Sophia are about to begin traveling as part of a mission to figure out the next carriers, and we witness Amicia giving a somber goodbye at the memorial she constructed for Hugo.
I'm sorry. Why is it so hard?
She pulls from the memorial one of their family necklaces and puts it on. The blink and you'll miss it moment is that Amicia never took her necklace back after hanging it on the tree in the first game. This necklace in the epilogue isn't hers but rather Hugo's, which he's kept since the first game. Amicia is becoming a Darun once again for this next stage of her journey, whereas Hugo never stopped being a Darun. Even if he had wanted to, he couldn't. The Macula travels through the blood of his family and has awoken in him. It's an unchangeable fact that means there's no hiding who he truly is. He comes to accept this fact as he does that he will likely have to die to stop the Macula. These are a series of little individual moments that get tied together to become something bigger, more impactful, and more impressive. Asobo Studios should be commended for this. They should also be commended for their effective use of humor, particularly in the sequel, where it's used to much greater effect than in the first game.
Come on! did it! I like your battle cry, by the way.
Thank you. It helps me build up speed, I suppose.
You're about as subtle as you are tall.
What? Water attack!
Hey! Counterattack. For the Daroons, Hugo! All right. I yield. You soaked me to death.
I win!
A sailor defeated by water. He shot me in the eyes, all right?
I did it on purpose.
These sorts of interactions develop the characters' personalities, but also makes them more likable, both things the first game struggled to do with the majority of its characters outside of Amicia, Hugo, and to a lesser extent, Lucas. There's a problem here that Requiem has because of this, which we'll circle back to in a few moments, but in Innocence, almost the entire band of kids are one-note, uninteresting, and while not specifically unlikable, rather just there. Roderick is a tough blacksmith guy, Melly and Arthur are twin thieves, and even Lucas is just a bookworm alchemist. He benefits a lot by becoming a more interesting character in the sequel, whereas all of the others I just listed either die or leave by the end of the first game. The best development that occurs is with Roderick in a quiet, optional moment while in the city during the final chapter. You can stumble upon his father's old forge that has now been destroyed by the rats and Inquisition, and he laments his family's legacy after everything that has occurred. It was a good moment, only a little undercut by the fact that he then dies in the section immediately following this. Requiem fixes one part of the problem with the side characters, their likability. Lucas, Arnaud, and Sophia are all more likable characters, but this also creates a new problem. They are likable to the detriment of not having realistic character arcs. Each are given at least 2 chapters as a companion, so you get to interact with them more, which is great for getting banter, but it doesn't change the fact their motivations and character writing often don't make sense bigger picture, and sometimes even contradict themselves. Arnaud is the best written of the side characters. He is a knight turned mercenary leader who has an axe to grind against the Count of Provence. While originally an antagonist to the Daroons, after witnessing Hugo's abilities with the rats, he strategically sees them as a tool for his personal goal of killing the Count and so joins them. It's narratively convenient that the Count happens to be on the same island Amicia and Hugo need to get to, but this leads to the well-done reveal that Arnaud was using the siblings, but more specifically Hugo and his rats to get revenge against the Count. His development initially felt quite forced, and Asobo Studio should be given credit here because it's intentional. I felt right in line with Amicia, not sure why exactly Arnaud was wanting to help, but not trusting it either. Until suddenly I did, just like the siblings. It was a moment where Amicia tells him about Hugo's illness and his reaction to that information that won me over. The game successfully made me care about him in the relatively short amount of time that he is in your party, and then pulls the rug out from under you with the reveal that he is using the kids. You also learn why he wants revenge against the Count of Provence, because he killed Arnaud's son. Suddenly, the pieces snap together in a way that retroactively makes prior scenes better. It's believable that a father might be so single-mindedly focused on killing his son's murderer that he would utilize any opportunity he could take, including something as shitty as manipulating children. It is also believable that he does in fact grow to care about Amicia and Hugo, but again, not enough to set aside his desire for revenge. Second, we have Lucas, and he's a step up from the previous game in that he now has more personality, but his motivation is harder for me to nail down. In the earlier chapters, he's clearly on the side of the Order, often telling Amicia that they need to trust the Order's decisions.
Things are getting worse and worse.
I know you're worried, but you should give Magister Vodon some time.
Time? To do what? Make Hugo feel even worse?
He's conducting tests, but he knows what he's doing. He's the most competent in his domain.
Oh, enough of that! He's been treating my brother like an animal! No. We need another solution. Like This island Hugo dreams of.
A dream? What can we do with a dream, Amicia?
Just keep caring about him, please.
I care. But it's not enough anymore.
I assumed the game was setting up an eventual conflict between Lucas and Amicia, especially when the siblings set off on their own to the island and leave Lucas with Beatrice. Then, when the alchemists reappear near the end of the game on Cuna, I was certain that they were going to betray Amicia in order to take Hugo to the Order as originally planned.
Fear really clouded our minds, didn't it? Except yours, Protector.
Yes.
Remember that house we have in the mountains? We'll be great there.
We'll be big and tall.
Sorry to interrupt. The Count wants to see you.
Me? Now? But we were about to leave.
He is the Count of Provence, my lady.
Yes. We'll wait for you.
Something about this scene just smelled wrong to me, with Beatrice being just a bit too agreeable. You do get betrayed here, but by the Count of Provence and his own accord, not by the alchemists. I'm not saying the game should have had Lucas and Beatrice do this either. I actually think Lucas plays a vital role in the chapters afterwards that I hadn't considered originally, but it does feel like the game is building towards something antagonistic with him, especially when he starts criticizing you about killing guards and telling you not to do it again.
Amicia, when we're there, you'll hold your sling, all right? We don't need another barn situation. So, no more killing soldiers.
Don't worry. I heard you the first time. I'll find other ways.
Unfortunately, he doesn't get much of a story arc. There's no resolution for the character on if the Order was right or wrong, and while he does take on more of a leadership role in the final chapters, he defaults back to being Amicia's trusting sidekick. He ultimately just plays the same role with the same motivations as he did in the first game, the bookworm alchemist assistant who is calm and collected, but not very interesting. Now, last but not least, we have Sophia, and she's a problem. An extremely likable one, but one nonetheless. It boils down to her motivations not making sense. She initially gets involved as their transportation only because she owes Arnaud a favor, which quickly becomes owing Amicia a favor, and she just sort of continues helping the siblings afterwards because she likes them. This is also despite the fact that they lie to her, and despite her quickly realizing that they are involved in some complex world-ending drama. Also, there's the fact that she's a smuggler pirate. When she's introduced, she mentions how the Count of Provence has landlocked her ship and that her smuggling days are over, yet once her ship is sailable again and she drops Arnaud and the Darun siblings off at Cuna, she just lingers around despite now being free. She's obviously quite good at what she does too, because her cabin is full of wares and expensive trinkets that Amicia can comment on, and so her remaining undercuts what we're shown. Sophia is clearly someone who is out for profit, and because of that probably shouldn't be trusted. On 2 separate occasions, she emphasizes this herself to Amicia.
Thank you for taking us.
Thank Arnaud. I'm usually not so kind.
Oh, fine. We can be friends if that helps.
Let's try. But you'll end up wanting to kill me too.
Despite this, she is quite a charming character, and getting to spend several chapters with her listening to her banter indeed makes her likable. It makes sense that Hugo, and in particular Amicia, would quickly be endeared to her as well as trust her. She's almost a surrogate mother figure, or at the very least an older sibling for Amicia. And while I liked Sophia, I once again expected a betrayal from her. I've said this for every single character, so it probably sounds like I just want some Game of Thrones level shit, but with Sophia, it actually feels like it makes sense. When she learns that Arnaud wanted to use Hugo, she wonders aloud what use Arnaud would have with such a small child, and then when she witnesses for herself the powers that Hugo has over the plague rats, she is visibly disturbed. That revelation for her actually leads to one of the sequel's best moments, in my opinion.
Hugo, Look at me. Hugo, look at me.
Sophia.
Why are you crying?
Because you're going to leave. Because of me.
Calm down. Now you listen to me. I've never seen anything like you two. And for some stupid reason, I like you. And I like you at the shittiest, worst of your life, right? I'm fine with that. Even the strangest things happen for a reason. Sailors' stories are full of it. That said, you need to seriously calm down and listen to what adults tell you. Deal? And you are not a goddamn army. He looks up to you. And when your death wish becomes his, this is what happens. And this will have consequences.
I'm torn on this because on one hand, this is a really meaningful scene and Sophia's curtness fits the tone. On the other hand, however, I don't think someone in Sophia's position would actually continue to help Amicia and Hugo. This is a smuggler so ruthless that her nickname is the Sea Scorpion and that the Count of Provence himself previously tasked knights with her capture, including Arnaud once upon a time ago. Yet all we ever see is Sophia, the kind and good-natured rogue who is risking her own life for children that she barely knows and that are objectively dangerous. These identities just don't mesh together, and so it leads to Sophia not really making sense as a character other than to be whatever the narrative needs her to be. It would make more sense for her to try and profit off the situation by, for example, delivering the kids to the Count in exchange for erasing her past crimes, or even sneaking away and abandoning them once she realized the full scope of the situation. And I can also understand why this isn't the case. The places this series goes, but in particular with the sequel, are already quite dark, and so having yet another shitty person betray the de Rune siblings would likely feel overused and nihilistic. As a consequence, however, and similar to Lucas, Sophia doesn't have any sort of story arc in the game at all, never mind a good one. She's just there to be likable and helpful despite that contradicting what we're told about her. Now, the game's front and center villains, meaning Vitalis and Nicholas from Innocence and Count Victor de Ares and his wife Emily from Requiem, share many of the same problems as the side characters. However, in my opinion, it matters a whole lot less with them because none feel like they're meant to be actual characters. Their plans and motivations make so little sense that I'm not convinced the developers intended for them to be anything more than surface level interesting and certainly not plausibly written. Instead, they should just be seen as rungs that lead to the next step on that character development ladder for Amicia, Hugo, and their relationship, rungs that just so happen to talk. For that reason, this section, with just 2 exceptions, won't spend a lot of time looking at the specific problems with these villains in the story because there's really no reason to. Instead, most of this section will focus on the other, less obvious villain within the story. Let's go through those 2 examples right away though, because I think they demonstrate exactly why I say the villains are so poorly written and thought out. Both instances involve the Count of Provence Victor Ars. So, we've established that in the middle chunk of the second game, Amicia, Hugo, Arnaud, and Sophia arrive at the island of Cuna. As they set foot on the docks, however, they are taken back by the greeting they receive and quickly learn that a local festival called the Brighter Days is occurring and is centered on a figure of local legend known as the Child of Light.
That's right! During the Brighter Days, all children are kings, just like the Child of Embers, who watches over our island. Your presence is a blessing, because you are the future, just like him, for he'll deliver all of us from the darkness.
Who's this child of embers, anyway?
A local deity, obviously. It's St. John's Week on the continent, the summer solstice. So it's probably all about fertility and prosperity.
Is he magical?
He's a god. Pagan one.
Peaceful one.
Yes.
The siblings are taken in by the Count and his wife after Arnaud's unsuccessful attack and are taught more about the celebration and story behind the child. The following day, Amicia, Hugo, and Sophia hike a portion of the nearby mountains after observing what looks like an important structure built into its side, only to stumble upon a pagan fertility ritual being guided by the Count and his wife Emily. Putting on disguises, they participate in the ritual in order to gain access into the structure, and as a side note, this is done quite well. This whole sequence is extremely unnerving the first time you do it, and feels like something out of the movie Midsummer.
Famine, war, and plague descend on us. He dreams of fire reborn.
I'm cold and scared.
It will end soon.
You are back and your torch is gone. You are not alone anymore.
Within the facility, the party learns that it is actually a former alchemist order building, and that the locals have built this mythology and religion around interpretations of the symbols and relics that remain. This is all extremely interesting and works in that Planet of the Apes sort of way, where the Justinian plague wiped all of the inhabitants out, and so the next settlers come up with their own story of what remains. So, jumping ahead, both the Count and his wife are deeply invested in this religion, and believe Hugo to be the child of embers reborn, given his black macula veins, as well as the surge of rats on the island. They believe this so much that they plot to secretly murder his whole family in order to keep and raise him as their own child.
Emily wants the boy, Amicia. I'm sorry, but she is sure now.
Sure about what?
That your brother is the child of embers. She must have him, so you must die.
No, listen! You are all completely wrong about this! Your cult, everything!
You're probably right. Because I invented most of it. And I did it for her.
What is exactly right? So it turns out the Count made up the entire religion in order to give his wife Emily hope after she suffered abuse from her parents. This is so completely unnecessary and reads like the developers thought they needed to make the Count more evil, like his bald head and unblinking eyes weren't evil enough, so they decided that he also made up the religion. It takes an interesting concept of the inhabitants' interpretation of the order and makes it less interesting in my opinion. I'm not convinced that it makes sense either. When the rats begin to seriously infect the island, the Count sets up bonfires, pulls the locals into the relative safety of the palace, and posts these ancient Greek fire flamethrower carts around to battle the rats. That last one, mind you, means that he has to have at least somewhat explored the ruins of the Order facilities on the island. His wife and the community take the rats as a sign that the Child of Embers is among them, yet the Count knows this is false. He knows this because, according to him, he personally made up the story. Worse, he should be losing his absolute fucking mind over the now millions of rats. His reaction shouldn't be to play along with his wife's fantasies, but rather to shut her down because this is serious. This could have actually been more interesting in my opinion too, if say he wasn't actually in this moment the villain and instead wanted Amicia's help with the rats. They could then discover that his wife was making moves behind his back based upon the delusions that he helped give her. It could still lead to the same outcome of Emily killing Beatrice, Hugo then killing her, and the Count being angry about that, but it would make the character more believable. You could argue that the Count is stupid, and you're correct. That's the point here. The second example takes place shortly after this. After the group escapes the island, they are attacked by the Count and his forces while out at sea. Amicia is shot by an archer, and Hugo, thinking his sister is now dead, gives himself to the macula.
Hugo, come here!
Sorry, child. The rats can't help you here.
No! Whatever you're planning with him, it won't work. He will destroy you. He'll destroy what I tell him to. We'll set this world aflame.
In this scene, we witness Hugo try to summon the rats, and the Count clearly recognized that he can't do that. Why? Because they're on a boat floating in the ocean. He just witnessed his wife and home consumed by the creatures, so this is good writing. What does the Count do immediately after he's destroyed the main character's ship, however? He brings the rat-summoning child to the nearby city of Marseille.
He thinks I'm dead. He gave himself to the Macula.
Marseille. You took the boy to Marseille after what happened to your damn island? Shut up! I will take care of it!
Just boots right on the ground, no follow-up to the strategy that he clearly just realized while on the boat. This is so comically stupid, and listen, I don't mean for that to sound disrespectful to the developers, but this is not consistent with the very dialogue presented 10 minutes ago when they were on the ship. Why would he have taken Hugo into the city? It can't even be argued that it's to conquer Marseille at this point because he still hasn't trained Hugo as far as we can see. The writers wanted the final chapter to occur in the visually interesting decimated city. Marseille is truly one of the best set pieces in the series, but it feels less authentic when the reasoning behind the set piece makes no sense and requires the villain to act stupid in order for it to even happen. I've read a lot of discussion within the community about how if the Count just had left them alone, if Amicia, Lucas, and Hugo could have gotten to their quiet and peaceful life in the mountains as planned, that everything would have been alright.
What will you do now?
My mother, she had a house, an old house in the mountains. I promised him a chance to be happy. That's where we'll get it.
Sounds nice.
In my opinion, this misses the point of the game and squarely puts the blame for what happens to Hugo at the feet of Vitalis or Count Victor, when really, Hugo was always going to die. The house in the mountains is not and never was a realistic option. Is Hugo just going to be in isolation for the rest of his life? What sort of life would that be for him? Kept alive, sure, but almost as a prisoner. The point is that there would always be another Vitalis, or the Count, or Alchemist Order. Hugo was always going to die, and accepting that is what the series is about. It's what Amicia's story is about. Her whole story arc and character development in the second game seems influenced by the famous 5 stages of the grieving process: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Each can be seen represented by at least one moment in the story, although just like in real life, they don't go in a prescribed order, and Amicia experiences some of the stages more than others. Denial is probably the easiest to recognize, as much of the game Amicia is in denial of what is happening to Hugo. Denial when she learns from Vaudin and her mother that Hugo will die, when Hugo himself says that it doesn't matter if he dies, and then with her stubborn insistence that there must be a cure to find on the island. She doesn't want to accept the reality that Hugo is going to die and is looking for any possibility that would allow her to reject that reality.
The last threshold means the death of the carrier.
No. There must be a way. Lucas
Your
managed...
friend bought you time when your brother reached the first threshold, but this is something else. There is no stopping it. No elixir, no potion.
We see flashes of her anger multiple times throughout the game, from small outbursts like in the Red City when she isn't allowed to be with Hugo due to Vaudin running tests, to much larger and more violent situations like the encounters with Arnaud's mercenaries on the riverbanks. Amicia and Hugo have only really gotten to know each other over the course of about a year, from the beginning of Innocence to the end of Requiem, but have experienced a lifetime's worth of trauma together. It's not fair that Hugo be taken away after the connection has been built. The game handles her anger quite well in many of these scenes as Amicia shifts between it and her panic. She is put into many situations where she's backed into a corner and then lashes out with extreme violence because of it. The big bargain she makes is in going to the island in the first place. She doesn't believe the Order can offer any help after witnessing Vaudin and is willing to follow Hugo's blind lead instead. Once on the island, she continues to expose herself and Hugo to the unpleasant history of the previous carrier for the belief that there must be something waiting for them, that Hugo can be uncomfortable just a bit longer, and that his dream of the island has to mean there's a cure.
There has to be something. A scroll? A file? Something.
I see nothing.
We witness a brief stint of depression after Hugo appears to have been consumed by the macula following his mother's death.
We will never be, Lucas. Never. There can be no peace for us. Look at him.
Seeing what her brother has been reduced to leads Amicia to largely want to give up, asking what the point of continuing is. This leads to one of the series' very best and completely optional moments that incorporates many of the stages of grief in it as well.
What a mess. I can't. Oh, please. Please. How am I going to do this? Please. I can't. Help me. Lord. Stop. Stop. Stand up. Stand up and go.
And finally, we have acceptance when Amicia is in the dreamlike state within the nebula that is overtaking Marseille.
It's a lie! It's the macula playing tricks!
I am the macula now! I am!
What? No!
You knew it could happen. It's too late.
No.
I let the macula take all of me. Now this is what happens.
I know.
We must do something. We must stop people from dying.
Maybe if we leave, it will stop. Hugo, can it stop?
I'm eating them, Amicia. Not just them, but all the others. And even more as the rats spread.
So this is the end?
Not completely. We have one chance. The last one.
Tell me. I'll do anything.
I think you know already. You must stop me. To stop the macula.
Hugo, you can't ask me that.
You're the only one who can stop me from becoming a monster.
You're not a monster.
I will be. If I kill all I love.
This leads to her killing the now empty host body of Hugo in order to stop the macula, and the epilogue shows us that Amicia is still processing her grief a year later. The development we see her go through over the course of the game is exceptional, and it's everything that we just discussed that I was at least in part referring to at the beginning of this video when I said that the tragedy and character work done in A Plague Tale with the siblings is some of the very best in the video game industry. While I haven't lost a sibling, I have lost my mother, and the story I witnessed being told in A Plague Tale, particularly with Requiem, felt authentic. Now, with that authenticity, though, came an uncomfortable feeling for me about 2/3 of the way through the game.
I can't! Amicia! Sophia!
Sweetheart.
Please, I know.
No, you don't. Why are you doing this?
Amicia.
Come, I'll carry you. We'll do this together.
This is too much.
I'm sorry you have to go through this. I do it for you.
I want rest.
You'll have it. But you must live first. I need you.
I'm scared of myself, Amicia.
You will live. We will fight. We will hold.
The feeling that Amicia, while not intentional, is just as much at fault for what ultimately happens to Hugo as Vitalis, the Count, or even the Macula. She's not evil. It's important to remember that she's roughly just 15 or 16 years old during the sequel, but her choices very much have consequences that the game itself continues to point out. This is an extremely unpopular sentiment with the fans of this series. Any discussion about the morality of Amicia is almost always immediately shut down on discussion sites like Reddit, and to some extent, I understand. She wanted to save her brother and would do anything to do that. It's very similar to the discussions that occur within the fan bases of The Last of Us and its narratives. However, as someone who cares about good writing in video games, this is exactly what I want. The uncomfortable feeling I got from watching Amicia dismiss Hugo's concerns as part of her own coping is what made the siblings and their emotions so compelling. And make no mistake, Amicia does dismiss Hugo, over and over again.
Calm down. You're fine now.
No, I'm scared.
Just walk. I'm with you. It doesn't change why we're here. Come, let's finish this first, right? An alchemy laboratory.
Can we go back now?
But it looks exactly like what you're searching for, no?
Yes, but...
No, you're right. Look for anything that could lead to an elixir. A potion, like books, drawings, maybe raw materials.
On it. I wanted to ask you, are you sure about all this? It seems like a heavy burden for him.
I know. And it is. That's why we're doing this.
Listen, we may not know each other well, but you're chasing ghosts. Ghosts that scare him.
We've gone through hell, Sophia. You can't imagine.
I can't. The question is, does he need more?
We have nothing else.
I believe you. Fine.
We could stay here. I like it here.
Staying here won't help you, Hugo. We must move.
Buddy!
What?
He's chained up.
We have to go back.
No, we need to get to that chapel.
Amicia, we've got a dead man here.
We'll be careful. There will be something left. Something to save you.
I don't care about me.
Don't say that. You're everything.
We shouldn't be here.
Well, we are.
Still leave, Amicia.
No. We'll pass that door all together.
It's wrong. So wrong.
What's going on?
It's there, Amicia. I don't want to.
But we have to. We have to.
What happened? And what happened to him?
I don't want to know.
You have to. He brought you here. It's your legacy.
I don't want a legacy. I want to be normal. It was horrible.
Yes, I'm sorry you had to see that. The Macula lured you in.
The Macula really has a way with children.
They put chains on him.
Yes, but you'll live. That's what's most important.
That's not what's most important.
That might have seemed tedious, but that's the point. Irrefutable evidence illustrating how time and again Amicia doesn't listen to Hugo's own wishes. In the beginning of the game, she treats his words about the island with such consideration, enough to take a leap of faith on the complete unknown of the island, but once there, she just disregards his concerns. To be clear, I don't think this is bad writing. I think it accurately portrays the corroding of Amicia's mental health and her unwillingness to accept anything other than a cure. If Hugo was dreaming about an island that turns out does exist, then it has to be for a reason in her mind. That's why it's tragic, because through her actions and choices, she is adding fuel to the fire for the Macula. She scolds Hugo for summoning rats when he chooses to, but then turns around and encourages it when it's useful for her.
I wanted to save them!
Hugo! You don't kill people just like that!
Why? You do it all the
Because...
And I can kill quicker than you!
You don't attack people by yourself! You listen to me and do as I say. Is that clear?
I don't care! They're all dead now anyway!
Hugo!
What the hell?
Yes! That's it! You did it! It's your turn, Emily! We'll spill your blood now!
And again, they're children. Amicia's not evil. I personally like that she never wavers in her support of Hugo either. There's no moments of doubt, even after seeing a literal city get destroyed due to her brother's seizures. The story isn't about the morality of what her choices are. We're not supposed to debate if Amicia, like Joel in The Last of Us, is wrong or not. It's a story about someone going through grief and the consequences that go along with that. So I just spent a long time fixated on inconsistencies and problems because that's what these critique videos typically are, pointing out the problems that take away from the experience the developers are trying to create. For this reason, I think it's important to emphasize that I greatly enjoyed these games, particularly the sequel Requiem, and that none of those inconsistencies ruin A Plague Tale's main focus, which is the tragedy we see Amicia and Hugo go through. There are these haunting moments that the series does so well that will stick with me. In the first game, it's the final scene. Vitalis has been stopped, and as he lies dying on the floor, Hugo watches him take his final breaths, and in return, Vitalis watches Hugo's final bit of innocence burn away. For Requiem, it was an entire chapter that got me. The one that follows Hugo killing Emily, and where you travel through a large-scale underground rat nest. The setting, in combination with witnessing the change in Hugo from kind and silly boy to now just this empty puppet controlled by the Macula, is high on my list of favorite video game moments ever.
Extinguish the flames.
We saw those things inside the carrier's tomb.
It will kill the sun.
What?
The Sun Killer. The Light Devourer. It's the nebula the old texts talk about. It's real.
I'm home.
No. No! This isn't home! Hugo, look at me!
It's not him, Amicia. It's the Macula talking, trying to fill the void, left by your mother's death.
It manages to convey so much uneasiness and concern by something as simple as Hugo no longer holding Amicia's hand consciously, and then when he does, it's unnerving.
It knows we're here!
So what? Move!
I think he's doing it.
What?
I felt his body spasm right before it all burst.
I told you, his bond with the Macula is getting stronger.
What I found most compelling about the Prima Macula was that it never seemed outright evil, but rather just a biological entity that was doing what it needed to in order to not just survive, but propagate. It never felt like it was manipulating Hugo simply because it was evil and wanted the end of the world, but rather because it was an instinctual drive to spread the plague, and manipulating its current host was a means towards that end. Given the sequel's epilogue showing the disease persisting into more modern times, I'm cautiously excited to see if and how the series continues to expand. The blend of historical yet mystical reminds me of the best aspects of the older Assassin's Creed games, and I could see future games in the A Plague Tale series utilizing something similar to the jumps to different time periods. Perhaps even borrowing one of the mini subtitles from the AC series as well, A Plague Tale Origins or perhaps Revelations certainly sounds like it could fit the bill if the series wanted to explore Amicia's journey to learn more about the Macula. Asobo Studios has developed a wonderful world, and I look forward to seeing where they take it next. Okay, hey, that's the end of the video, and I just wanted to say thank you for watching, and that I also have a few remarks about the series that I'm putting here at the end because they didn't fit anywhere else in the script. First off is that Requiem's gameplay is head and shoulders above the first game's. It fixed and improved upon every issue I had with the first game system, which was really cool to see. The crossbow is a great addition, if perhaps a bit too powerful, especially with the final upgrade, which lets you retrieve bolts you fired, effectively giving yourself infinite ammo with it if you know what you're doing. The combat encounter arenas grant a wider range of approaches and options for how you move through them, whether that's as Rambo, sneakily picking guards off one by one, or trying to get through completely unseen and with clean hands. While still improved, enemy variety could have used one more type, and it's confusing because I think that type already exists in the game. The game uses an enemy falconer in one encounter towards the beginning of the island chapters where you have to quickly go from cover to cover, otherwise it'll strike and kill you. I originally thought this was going to lead to encounters where other enemies were around, but you couldn't move completely freely because of a falconer enemy in the area. This could have led to unique and intense situations where enemies are attempting to flush you from cover, yet the falconer picking you off if you're too slow to find new cover. This doesn't happen, and perhaps it was cut due to time or just not working past the concept stage, but this single use of the enemy felt very random and was something I'd forgotten about until my second playthrough. I also found it strange that the massive Inquisition force that Nicholas and Vitalis were leading, complete with all of those alchemists and equipment, is never mentioned again in the sequel. There's a part in the game where Amicia and Hugo bump into a religious group who are pilgriming to the Vatican, and I expected to hear or see something about the Inquisition, but we don't. They ultimately weren't needed and probably would have bloated the sequel's narrative, but it still seemed odd to me that they just disappear completely given how fanatical and powerful they were in the first game. And that's it. I'm still currently ironing out plans for the next larger project, so expect a smaller video or two on some of the indie games I've been playing as I work out what that bigger project is going to be. Some options I'm considering for the smaller video are The Messenger and Gravity Circuit. If you stuck around to this, I'd appreciate a like, maybe a subscribe or a comment if you enjoyed the video. It certainly helps the algorithm. And yeah, with that, take care.